grace, peace, and mercy from Christ, the author of our faith. You're probably wondering what I'm doing here. Well, tomorrow is the day of St. Nicholas, a day when children around the world will put out their shoes and stockings and wait for gifts. We think about Christmas time as a gift-giving time, but most people around the world celebrate Nicholas. I am Nicholas today. I get to be here a day early. The early Christians believed that the day you died, that God would give you a time every year that you would get to come back and do good works. So here I am. The 280s were a very hard time to live. That's about the year I was born, 280. Not very long after Jesus' death. And I became a Christian because Paul, the apostle, had come through the Twin Cities. No, not Minneapolis, St. Paul, not like we know the Twin Cities. Lycia and Patara in Asia Minor, where I was born. My parents died when I was fairly young, but I was lucky enough to have an uncle who was a priest. So I went to live in the monastery with my uncle. Unfortunately, at that time you could die of just about anything. The common cold took the life of my uncle. And so therefore, the bishop of Myra became my father, my uncle, my mother, my grandparents, my everything. As a very young boy, I had a dream that God had spoke to me, and he said, "Nicholas, I have a calling on your life." I didn't know what that meant. I was only about 12 years old. But I knew that God had called me and he had spoken to me. It wasn't very long after that my beloved bishop died. And our parish was in a terrible way. We couldn't find anyone to fill the spot of a man that everybody loved. So one morning I got up to go and pray. I just couldn't wait to get to the church. I dressed quickly and I ran to the church, and as I entered, I figured no one would be there. And as I entered the doors, an elderly bishop said, "Child, what is your name?" And I stepped back because I wasn't expecting anyone to be in the church at that hour. And I said, "I'm Nicholas, sir. I'm the servant of Christ in the church." And he says, "Nicholas," which means the people's victor, "you are the new bishop." Well, I took another step back. I was getting ready to run. "I'm only 15 years old, sir. I can't be the next bishop." He says, "God has chosen you, Nicholas, to be our bishop." An aged man, much better than I, but God had called me. So I served that parish as best as I could. As a 15-year-old boy, it's very hard to be a priest to people in their 60s and 80s, and as you might know, sometimes it's hard to do that. They look at you and think you're a child, you know nothing. And as a child, I did know nothing, but God gave me the strength. Then, there was a wicked man that came into power. His name was Diocletian. And he said that we would have to worship the Greek and Roman idols. And I said, no. I told my parish, I said, do not fall and worship these heathen gods and these idols. And I was thrown into prison, where I stayed for 8 years. They would take me out daily and beat me. And they would only give me just enough food to live. So, that's why my beard turned white. I was a very young man when I lost my hair and my beard turned completely white. And finally, when Diocletian was killed, there was a new man that came into power. His name was Constantine. He wasn't a very good ruler to begin with either, but God showed him the way. And he even, you've probably heard of this before, he called a council at Nicaea. I think you guys still say the creed. Is that right? I was the 151st bishop at to sign in at the Council of Nicaea. And I was very excited to be there. Oh, well, I did get out of prison. And I got to go home. And as I was walking down the streets, of course, my beard is white, and the young children who I dearly loved looked at me a little odd. Of course, my clothes were all tattered and worn. I got home as best I could. And as I'm walking down the street, one child looks at me and he says, "Bishop Nicholas?" And I was so excited that he remembered me, that I jumped for joy. And he ran off and told the whole congregation, and everyone came, and we had a huge celebration in the town. I was so excited to be home to my people. Now we get to the story of the Council of Nicaea. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this man. He was a bad man also. His name was Arius. He had spouted off a whole bunch of things, and they called the Nicene Council because he said that God and Jesus were not co-equals, that God was a much higher being than everything else. Of course, we don't believe that. We believe that the Trinity is all equal, that they all have the same power. So I'm sitting in my seat, and I'm listening to this man spout off things. I just couldn't take it. I got so mad that I jumped up and I slapped him in the face. And I said, "That's heresy, my friend." Well, unfortunately for me, it's not correct to have any violence in front of a ruling emperor. So they took my clothes. I was bare naked, and they put me in a room for 3 days. And I prayed, and I said, "Lord," because the punishment for this could be death. And I prayed, "Lord, I know my zeal was a little too much, and I'm sorry for that." Luckily, I think Constantine agreed with me. And a couple of days later, they let me out and gave me my clothes back, and I was able to sit and listen to the things that we had decided would be. There was a man a little bit later, I think you guys might know him. His name was Martin Luther. He felt very much the same way that I did about Arius. Well, now you're wondering, how is it that a man named Nicholas becomes a saint, for one, and how is it that all these years later we still talk of him? Well, that's fairly simple. The person we know as Santa Claus is based on me because, when my parents died, luckily they were fairly wealthy. So when I went to the monastery, I had a good bit of money at my disposal. Well, I never felt that I needed the money. I had all I needed at the monastery and lived there happily. So any time that I could help people, I did so. There's one very important story that's been passed through the ages, and it has to do with a certain nobleman who had 3 daughters. And he had fallen on hard times and had no money. And he had prayed to God for deliverance. And it seemed that God hadn't heard his prayer. Well, he came to the church to do confession. And of course I was there for the confession. And he confessed that he was thinking of selling one of his daughters into slavery, or even worse, prostitution, so that his other 2 daughters could have a dowry to be married. So he thought if he sold one, he could save the other 2. I prayed to know what God would have me to do, whether I should just go and speak to him, but that didn't seem the thing to do. So late at night, I put on my cloak and I grabbed a bag of gold from the treasury, and I took it to the house. And everyone was sleeping, and I opened the window just a bit and I dropped it in. Well, it fell in a shoe. So that's why they put out their shoes to get gifts in Italy. Well, the gold saved the first daughter. The oldest daughter, she was able to get married and lived in the parish and was quite happy. Well, as we know, money spends, and it happened again. The second daughter needed a dowry. Well, I did the same thing, the cover of night, but the nobleman had talked very much about wanting to know who had blessed his family. So he was kind of watching. Well, the second time I thought I was going to be a little bit smarter, so I just left it on the doorstep. Nobody saw me. God says to give in secret, to not let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. And that was my plan. Well, again, the money spends, and it comes time for the third daughter. Well, this time, the nobleman said, I am going to find out who is doing this for my family. So that night, I had this brilliant idea that I would climb up on the roof and drop it down into the chimney. Because, of course, that would be fast, and nobody would know to look there. Well, as I'm scrambling down the chimney after I drop the gold, the nobleman comes out and sees me, and he says, Bishop Nicholas, I knew it was you all along. And the story perpetuated over all of these years. And that is how the giving of gifts started, and being associated with me. Now, I did that often. I gave as many gifts as I possibly could. And I loved the children, so anytime I would see the children, I would give them little bits of candy and things. Now, if any of you are familiar with Nicholas, with me, you may think, well, if he was Bishop of Myra, why did they call him St. Nicholas of Bari? Well, now, Bari is in Italy. Now, if you know any Italians, they're a very interesting people. And they decided at some point that they needed a saint. Well, you either have to get a saint as a young child and grow them up, or you just have to be blessed with one. Well, they had neither. And they thought about it for a while, and they said, well, who's the most famous saint? Who would we love to have here? Well, I'd already been buried in my hometown of Myra, the place that I loved. Well, the Italians came to Myra, and they came into the church, and they stood in front of my tomb, and they said, here's Nicholas. I think we should take him to Italy. Well, of course, the people of my town were not going to let that happen. So the Italians said, okay. They left. But they came back at night, and they busted into my tomb, and as the Italians say it, they translated me to Bari, Italy, where I am buried now. It is said that from my tomb flows a substance very much like myrrh, that is a sweet-smelling, kind of like honey is the way they describe it. I don't know if that's true or not. And I don't know that any man is worthy of all of the lauds that I've had. But I am very thankful that God had prepared me to lead the people of Myra. And as the gospel says today, prepare ye the way of the Lord. Greater love has no man than to lay down his life for his brother. Amen. Amen.
That's quite interesting. Will you please stand? Let us make confession of our faith in the words of the Apostles' Creed.